David Langwallner, thank you for speaking to Cassandra Voices.
Hello, Luke. How are you?
Very well. David, the British High Court has made a request in the Assange case to place questions to the American side, and it's inviting responses. These things are based on certain concerns over Assange's rights. Can you comment on what's just transpired yesterday, Tuesday, the 26th of March?
Well, as I understand, there were 6 questions raised in the appeal, and 2 of them caused the court a degree of concern. Um, Broadly speaking, if we look at synoptic and simplistic terms initially, it was one issues to do with freedom of speech. And secondly, it was issues to do with the death penalty. So if we could deal with them sequentially, and of course, what they're asking for is a set of responses from the US authorities, and presumably that means the State Department. And a lot of that will condition whether and to what extent Mr. Assange can progress further within the appellate structure of the English system. That is dependent on the Americans' responses. I hope that doesn't sound overcomplicated because I want to simplify it now. The first concern that the court has expressed deals with freedom of speech. As a whistleblower, Mr. Assange is engaged in the act of freedom of speech. And within the American constitutional system, were he to be extradited, for example, would he be entitled to raise such a defense or such an argument within the structure of the American system? The Americans really do, at one level, prioritize above all else in terms of the Constitution, the First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. The problem becomes, in Mr. Assange's case, he's a non-national. It's crucial to understand this. He's a non-national, and also he is, as far as the Americans are concerned, and I do not mean to be unnecessarily pejorative or critical, he's a pinko commie or a lefty. The reason I use that rather evocative phrase at the end is that the freedom of speech protections the Americans recorded right back to the famous canonical case of Whitney v. California in 1929 with the great Louis Brandeis and the great Oliver Wendell Holmes in the American court, two of the greatest judges that have ever lived, particularly. Both gave affirmative but dissenting opinions. Now, let me explain what that means. They both agreed with the regulation of what they call seditious, in this case, communistic or socialistic speech, anarcho-syndicalist speech in context. But they did so only on the basis of a test discredited subsequently that it would cause what's called a clear and present danger. It's, I think, the title of a Thomas Clancy novel, who, of course, was a right-wing American populist writer. But Brandeis's fabulous concurring opinion is very nuanced, and it's about, well, the acceptance of different points of view, time to reflect. It is not a clear and present danger, Brandeis in effect says, if you're involved in a discussion. And we are involved in a discussion about Mr. Assange. Point one. Point two, leaving aside his political taint and his ethnic taint. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, he's not an American citizen. The Americans have always protected in a bright line way, that means the most extreme way imaginable, freedom of speech. So you've got the classic case in 1969 of Brandenburg v. Ohio, where you had a Ku Klux Klan rally, and the Ku Klux Klan leaders are there, and they're saying all these horrible anti-Semitic, racist, anti-black comments or anti-Afro-American comments. Yet the American Supreme Court said they weren't for public consumption because they were speaking to the converted. So they changed the clear and present danger test, in effect, though it had been changed for a while, to an imminent sense of lawful violence. There would be no violence based in their speech because they were preaching to the converted. Now, that shows the extent the Americans go to protect freedom of speech, and they've done so in other cases. Religious fundamentalists protesting outside of a gay serviceman's funeral in Snyder v. Phelps. This is only recent.
Yes.
This is
Yes.
Alito and Roberts and so forth. So they've gone to extreme extents to protect freedom of speech as long as it's political or so forth. But they've always had this blind spot about seditious speech that undermines the authority of the state, that is communistic or socialistic. And remember, we are in Trumpian times. It doesn't matter that he's not re-elected yet, which I think almost inevitably he or his acolytes will be. It is simply that he has dictated the culture of America and the Supreme Court to such an extent that were Mr. Assange to be extradited and rely on his freedom of speech rights in WikiLeaks in some way for the purpose of any hearings that were conducted in America, how seriously would he be taken? And then there's the fact that he's a non-national. And the American freedom of speech jurisprudence on non-nationals is all over the place, particularly in terms of inviting people into the country. There was a famous Belgian professor, and he had socialistic views, and they refused him immigration status into the country. And the American Supreme Court said, well, his rights, in effect, as a non-national are diminished. And there's no clear-cut, bright-line rule about this. So the ultimate question, I think, in essence, the English court are posing about this is, were he to be sent back to America, make challenges within the American system, what's happened based on his exercise of freedom of speech, how much would they protect him as a non-national and a commie, or a lefty, or a state subversive, as they perceive it, in the light of a Supreme Court, which in effect in America are ideologically brainwashed, or in any Coney Barrett's case, psychiatrically brainwashed. So that's the first point. The second point of concern is more complicated. I'll try and make it simple. The second point is about an assurance about the death penalty. Now, it creates all sorts of complex arguments. You have told me, and I have read, that there is some indication that they're reneging or going back on the fact that they lock him up for 75 years. But there's no clear-cut determination that is the case, nor is there a promise they won't seek the death penalty. I mean, after all, this is, as far as the Americans are concerned, treason, subversion, being a traitor. Yeah? Same with Roger Casement, same with the Rosenbergs, all that. And so there's no guarantee they will necessarily seek the death penalty. And you can see Assange, if the Trumpian lunatics take over, it would be a perfectly amazing act in populist hysteria for them to seek the death penalty.
Can he be accused of treason, though, if he's not a citizen of the US?
Well, I'm not quite sure about Ethel Rosenberg and so forth, but it's sedition, I think, then. But I think that also carries the death penalty. And the Rosenbergs were executed.
Okay.
Yes. Now, the complexity of this, and it really needs to be unpacked as far as the British authorities are concerned, is there's a very old but very famous case, not that old in context, but it's called Suring v. United Kingdom, Soering. And the case concerned a young man, I think he was 17 or 18, who had a relationship with, he was a German national and had a relationship with a Kentucky woman in Kentucky. And in an adolescent kind of relationship structure, a kind of echo of America and the world to come. He didn't like her parents, so he killed them. And he flees the country and is arrested at Heathrow Airport en route back to Germany. The Brits don't know what to do, basically. And they seek advice, assurances, guidance from the American authorities, which is not dissimilar to the Assange logic now. And one of those guidances is, if we send him back, remember the Brits at this stage are part of the European Convention as they are now. Will you enforce the death penalty? And it's Virginia. And some sort of mad prosecutor lunatic in Virginia, who's the Attorney General, says, sure we will. In other words, we're not going to say we won't. In an odd sort of way, even allowing for the relatively liberal, if that is a correct word, apostrophe, question mark, a Biden administration, are they going to send back unequivocally in Assange's case a complete univocal assertion? We're not going to seek the death penalty in this case. So that may be one concern the English court had, legitimately. The second concern arising from the Surrey case is different. It's complex, but it's important to understand. At the time of the Surrey case, the prohibition on the death penalty was not part of European Convention law. Article 2 of the European Convention, which deals with the right to life, allowed for the death penalty. Remember, the French had the guillotine until the late 70s and so forth. And Harry Gleeson, who I represented, was executed in Ireland before progressively Charles J. Haughey ultimately outlawed the death penalty for capital crimes and thereafter. But the point is, the abolition of the death penalty was always, in international terms, a work de lega and ferenda. Everybody on my side of the argument, or any side of legitimate progressive argument, believed in its abolition, but it didn't happen. But the European Convention ultimately bit the bullet, and they did. But in Surrey in 1979, they had, they agreed. So the European Court of Human Rights in Surrey were confronted with, well, the Virginia person saying, I'm not going to guarantee you we won't seek the death penalty. But what the European Court of Human Rights decided is we're not sending him back anyway. It's not so much the death penalty. It's the death row experience. In other words, we're going to send him back. We sent back Surrey 7, 8, 10, 20 years perhaps. I've seen 24. And others have seen more. Of banging up and down the American system with endless appeals before execution with ultra degrading, dehumanized treatment.
Yes.
But the ultra degrading, dehumanized treatment, the death penalty, is called the death row experience, which is what the European Court said in 1979 was contrary to Article 3 of the Convention, which Britain is part of, that it is inhuman and degrading treatment. And it is, in effect, a form of psychological torture. It's an odd sort of thing, but it bears scant resemblance to the living death Mr. Assange will actually have. I mean, in death row, I've been in death row in America, right? And, no one would recommend it. And obviously, a sanitized version of it was presented to me, I suppose. But equally, there are forms of liberties and forms of non-control available. If a prisoner is under this settled expectation, there is, even within the awful American system, there is a sense that they treat them not entirely badly. But that's different to what would happen to Mr. Assange. And so the Surrey case is terribly relevant. It's not so much the death row experience. It is under Article 3 of inhumane and degrading treatment. If we send him back, what's going to happen?
In the past, people raised the issue of him being sent to Guantanamo. There's the obvious threat of being sent to a supermax prison for kind of eternity where he won't be able to kill himself, in fact, and will just be observed, a fate that I believe was handed down to Zacharias Moussaoui, the only one of the 9/11 attackers they captured at the time. Kind of place where they send, what they take to be the worst offenders against the American state. But this is a person who's not a citizen of Britain or the US, a person whose category of crime, in fact, doesn't really have much precedent. He's being charged with espionage, but even that seems like a stretch to me. And so somebody looking at it might see the whole process as very, very cynical, and this is a chance for British justice to pull back from something.
Well, they have, and I think.
And you say they have, and there's hope. Well, this is positive that you make.
They're beginning to.
I see.
You've got to understand what the Brits are like in a way. The greatness of Britain, Napoleon called them a nation of shopkeepers, and look what happened to him.
Yeah.
A shopkeeper beat him in Waterloo. The greatness of Britain has always been mediocrity, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. It's always been muscle through, half measures, a bit of moderation, this side and that, the rule of law.
Right.
The greatness of Britain is expressed in a limited way in that opinion. It's, thank you very much, we're all in Foreign Office speak, we're all, we understand what you want, but could you please tick these boxes? And even then, we have obligations to the European Convention of Human Rights. I don't want to appear before an Irish audience as an absolute supporter of Britain unconditionally, which I am not. But you've got to understand that the platinum chip justice system has always been British, because they appoint people to the bench, not true in Ireland, who are not lunatics, are not true in America, who are moderate, who are nuanced, and who are balanced. They don't believe in appointing politically appointed lunatics, generally speaking. And the very important point in that context as well is these are very subtle people. Not just reading between the lines, but knowing the lines.
Uh-huh.
They're not just saying to America, hold on a second. They're conscious of the Syrian case. They're saying, if he's sent back to one of these, you know more about them than I do, actually, these awful correctional facilities, will it not be like the Syrian experience, the death row experience? Could you assure us it won't be? And a point I implicitly made, but didn't I elaborate upon, I think it's probably the British establishment's view of this, is that this has all gone too far. You're far too hysterical about him. It's double standards gone mad. You're mad, but we can't say it because you're our partners, you're Americans, yeah? Even though we think you are.
Wow.
But that's exactly what they're saying. I mean, you've got to understand, I think it's crucial to understand, that the American Supreme Court has at least 2 or 3 judges who are certifiable. Clarence Thomas or Amy Coney Barrett.
Okay.
People who are almost like disqualified from institutional responsibility. I hesitate to say that with such obvious vigor, but the point is, the British judge, the kind of, Ealing comedy, moderate, Lord Haw-Haw, slightly vigorous, slightly plummy person, is a person, whether they're Tory, Liberal or socialist, inclined, particularly in criminal and public interest work, say on the one hand this, on the other hand that. Let's not go too extreme. And what exactly is sedition? Sure, we all disagree with each other anyway. So one would have thought that it's like a shot across the Americans' bows for reassurances. And it's up to the Americans how they reassure. And if they don't reassure adequately, then Assange has more appellate structures within the system left. And I think the English establishment, or rather, I know the English establishment, is very queasy about all of this. They don't want it to happen.
You spoke to me earlier on the topic, saying that you felt very confident that the British system would also respect rulings from the European Court of Human Rights, even despite Brexit having happened, and there being confusion as to whether or not they would.
I mean, the judge at the moment, these are impermanent, very fluid times, you know.
Well, yes,
they really are. But at the moment, they have not, the Tories, derailed the ECHR.
yeah.
And the practice of the English judges is to enforce it, unlike the practice of the Irish judges, who just ignore it or sidestep it. Now, even within that criticism structure, such as Lord Hoffman or Jonathan Assumption, giving out about certain aspects of the ECHR decision-making processes, Assumption tends to be even more critical of them. But there's not a jettisoning or not a taking into consideration and not a diminishment or not an ignoring of. And these are not the sort of issues that concern Assumption or Hoffman, both former House of Lords judges. These are not issues of family life and privacy that they think the ECHR kind of welfareism and mollycoddling went too far. These are issues fundamental to liberty. And liberty is warped into the British character, yea, unto the Middle Ages, yea, unto Magna Carta. Today I did a case in Reading Crown Court and saw the Reading reproduction of the Bayeux Tapestry with the addendum of William the Conqueror crowned at the end. The Brits respect fundamentally, even the absence of written constitution, due process and fairness and legality, and they enshrine that in statutes like Section 76 and Section 78 of PACE. They don't like this stuff. They just don't. It just goes against everything in their character of moderation and decency. And so it's a subtle warning bow they're sending about the Surrey case. I think they're saying, you've got to tell us if you take him back. You're not going to lock him up in dehumanized, torture-driven conditions, a la Guantanamo Bay, where he's reduced to mush and his life is a vegetable. Please. He's not like that. And if you don't, and then the question becomes, what happens then? Well, Assange can go through the English process further up, because those judges, High Court judges, permit him to do so. He'll go to the ECHR. Or in the Surrey case, an interstate action was taken. That means Germany, because Surrey was a German national, took a case against the Brits. And the ECHR will want guarantees. And I can imagine the level of support from Assange. That is, if the Brits don't ask the ECHR for clarification of it, will be considerable. And the two legitimate concerns are the fact, and if you reference Guantanamo Bay, and then if you look at the Lindy Chamberlain thing, one hesitates to say this, but the American criminal and military justice system has become barbaric. They're barbarians. They have failed to comply with any civilized values.
Do you think it has made? Yes.
Sorry? I didn't hear that.
Do you think that it will have made much difference from the point of view of the British judges that Assange hasn't appeared in court in person?
Well, I mean, no one. I mean, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I'm in Belmarsh prison every couple of weeks, and so I arrive up there, and you see the Assange banners and placards, and withering in the wind. And, as I go into the court, I often just go right. And Belmarsh, if you look at the court complex, Woolwich Crown Court is here, Belmarsh Prison to the left, and the other prison to the right. And I always go in because that's where, either taxis or buses go, or the Plumstead Walk comes in from Plumstead train station. You walk in an entrance where, as you're walking into Woolwich Crown Court, you're looking straight at the entrance of Woolwich Crown Court, and marching to the left, Belmarsh Prison, where Mr. Assange is. And Woolwich Crown Court. I mean,
Right.
some of them are absolutely judges. I mean, wonderful people like Gomparts. It's fantastic. And so I've never any issue with them. But it's an intimidating place. And Mr. Assange has been there in a high security Category A prison for a number of years. Now, it's despite British penological civilized standards, it's still a Category A prison. And he was in the Ecuadorian. How long was he in the Ecuadorian embassy for? I mean,
5 and 6 years at least. And the details of what happened there are quite extraordinary, because he was sort of only able to play that for a while, and there's a lot of evidence of him really desperately losing his mental health and being sort of hounded and pursued by agencies and intelligence services in the world. This
is how they work. They reduce people to much. I mean, who knows what's the man? He might be at this stage a kind of Howard Hughes figure.
Apparently at some point he might have been kind of rubbing or wiping feces on the walls of the embassy. Somebody at least who worked there accused him of doing that. But I took more to be, if it was the case, that he's really gone into some mental decline. The first 5 or 6 years,
I mean,
as you would,
But I mean, and all of that is dehumanizing of him. And all of it is enough is enough. And it's like Shakespeare. It's like, The Merchant of Venice, a pound of flesh. The Americans have had their fucking pound of flesh. They've had much more. They don't deserve any more.
Yes, indeed.
And they don't deserve. And they're not, frankly, on a fundamental level, they're not entitled to put a man who did more good than bad back to the conditions of their prisons when they've got the prospective President Donald Trump, who really should be treated in the way Assange has been treated. And Trump is more like the symbol of the most Chomsky, the most quoted 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, the most evil organization in human history is the Republican Party of America. Mr. Trump, several members of the American Supreme Court, and most of the Republican Party should be locked up in 23-hour solitary confinement, not Julian Assange.
David, at least in this response, you're giving a little more confidence and a little more optimism than you did last time, in fact. So that...
Yeah, I mean, it's a great...
It's a good turn of events. Okay. Well,
I think we Irish are too begrudging of that, really.
That's true. I would agree.
Deep down, it's the reason British people are great. It's because they're not extremists and they're moderate. And they don't like the smell of this.
Okay.
No one does.
Yeah. Habeas corpus was one thing you mentioned, and I thought of that. It's sort of this matter whereby someone is so patently being bypassed by some basic elements of justice that he hasn't been able to appear. He was sort of summoned back to Sweden originally, but he now, as it turns out, wisely felt that if he
turned him into a cipher, a dehumanized object.
He was going to be kidnapped, especially rendered, and possibly sent to Guantanamo or killed. Trump has spoken pretty much about wanting to assassinate him. So, all this sort of stuff, which is just dropping the bottom out of justice, really. its very basic sense. And I think Assange was
Well, I
he
think
was a
it's
difficult
important
man.
to
He's a
realize
difficult man, but I think he was right. Yeah.
he may be a difficult man. He may
Yeah.
have engaged in active criminality. He may not be all right. But I
Mm,
think it's important to understand
mm,
that if one were to convene a modern day Nuremberg tribunal,
mm.
one would put Mr. Trump and some elements of the American Supreme Court and a lot of elements of the Republican Party of America in that tribunal, not Mr. Julian Assange.
David, thank you very much for
But the
sharing.
problem has become, does the Biden-esque and that great man Obama, does that very vociferous, limited level of the liberal American intellect grasp this? And if the State Department in America is prepared to say the following: we are not going to serve, we're not going to seek the death penalty. And you've got these hysterically mad Republican prosecutors who are just crazy. There's a book written by this guy on who's a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, where he was the head of the prosecution service, Southern District of New York, confusing guilt and sin. He didn't just want people to plead guilty; he wanted them to confess for their sins. I mean, these people are crazy, full stop. And that's Cody Barrett and that type as well. But the point is, if the fragile liberal American establishment says to the Brits, well, one, we're not going to seek the death penalty. Two, as a precursor to extradition, we'll house him in, an open prison like the Norwegians or something like that, a secure space where he can walk around or something of that nature. And secondly, if he wishes to take a challenge against or detention, then he can do so, and he can exercise as a non-national his rights of freedom of speech.
Right.
Then you would imagine both the Brits and the European Court of Human Rights would have less causes for concern. But that depends ultimately on what any element of ethics, responsibility, respect for due process and the rule of law exists within the liberal American system at this point in time. If that is done, and also they have to be person factored. He's not a package, he's a human being. What state is he in? How are we going to treat him? I mean, all of this is madness. They should have stopped this hot pursuit like a American cavalcade comedy of the 1970s.
Yes.
They should have stopped this redneck hot pursuit of him a long time ago. And, rednecks, to reference the Randy Newman song, control the universe. Trump is a redneck, and so are his friends. They should have stopped it. The question becomes, can the voices of moderation, reason, and balance outweigh the rednecks? So the Americans get their pound of flesh and eat their humble pie simultaneously, And the ideal solution would be just to say, we've won, you did commit a criminal act, at most you serve a sentence in a residential penitentiary where you can walk around the place, and perhaps we should also apologize for the damage we've caused to your mental and physical health at 54 years of age or whatever it is.
Yes.
But watch this space as far as the Americans are concerned. The Brits have very cleverly, in that kind of George Smiley way of theirs, put the ball firmly in the Americans' court.
David, thank you.
And the nuances of their response are, if you read it, cryptographic in code terms.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes, indeed. We look forward to seeing the next strike. David, thank you very much.
Well, yes. Not at all. Take care.